insurance solutions and or nature-based solutions on the ground. And, we basically asked them, how does it work? How did you quantify them? And how does this actually then, sort of work? And I guess for us, the key question would be, is this also something that can be scaled up and brought in, taken into other contexts? And then we're going to put you all into little breakout groups for a brief discussion about this, where you can also share your own experiences, and where we really want to understand, also how this sectoral community that the InsuResilience Global Partnership has been setting up, what is it that we can actually do? What are the sort of opportunities for us to help facilitate greater use of nature-based solutions in an insurance and investment context? So we'll do that in a minute. First, I'm really excited to welcome three experts who will very briefly throw at us some information about the exciting work they're doing. And yeah, let's start with, I can just see, I think the order we have here. Yeah, we go to you, Ship, who's going to give us a quick overview of your work at AXA.
Thanks, Swenja. Hope you can hear me okay. So yeah, this relates to something called the Coastal Risk Index, which we launched at COP at the end of last year. And really is about how we address and how we integrate ecosystems into our risk models, really for the first time. And so I don't have an amazing array of slides, allow other people, only for the fact that we don't have too much time. But I wanted to allow you at least an understanding of some of the behind the scenes elements of the index itself. And just to let you know that this was pulled together really because of the fact that, there are two reasons. One is from a business perspective, and us being able to identify and integrate risks with and without those ecosystems into our models, but also on the sustainability side, the nature of nature, and indeed how we are able to help to preserve and restore and manage those ecosystems more effectively, with the obvious benefits to coastal populations, ecosystems themselves, etc. And so the index itself is based on three parts. Is the focus on the risks of physical assets from storm surge and sea level rise, and this is very much sort of the piece that we're talking about here, and we're working closely with Mike and another AXA chair at IHE Delft. But there are two other elements that will come down the line. One related to social vulnerability. Again, Mike linked to that, and how those ecosystems play a positive role in reducing that vulnerability, especially when it links to flood hazard. And then the final piece of the puzzle will come when we look at the income streams linked to the degradation of those ecosystems as well. But in terms of this, very quickly, ultimately we're focusing on a dynamic extreme sea level rise projections. And so rather than it being a bathtub model, we're very much focusing on that dynamic element. And rather than, and I suppose part of where we're also going is integrating wave height and storm surge into these models as well, which doesn't necessarily always happen within our industry. And then what we are evidently looking to try and do is to determine and quantify the benefits of restoring those lost mangroves as well. So we've done various pieces of work more recently with the Nature. You can press the next button with the Nature Conservancy and UCSC on this too. But in terms of granularity, we're very much focused on as granular as we can get. So 90 meters resolution for the flood inundation data. The population asset values, which, as Mike suggested, is also being calculated. We're doing so at 1,000 meter or 1 kilometer resolution, and then looking at mangrove benefits, basically what Mike had in his slide with those green dots at 2 kilometer segments globally. And then what we're also looking to do is, although the ecosystems we're focusing on relates to mangroves and reefs. The flood model itself, the flood inundation model, is global, and so we have these segments across the world. And then sort of pretty much, if you can press the next button, and then Daniel, this sort of relates, probably links to your question around return periods. As you can see here, we're not only looking at a baseline today's flood levels, but we're also looking to identify that today, 2030, and in 2050. So we are linking that to sea level rise, the impacts of climate change, but at those different return periods as well. So 5 all the way through to 1,000 years. So, this information is not just linked to, or won't just be useful for us at AXA or AXA XL. It is available to anybody to use. Now, not all of this information is yet on the website. In fact, as you see there, coastalriskindex.com is very much is where we are currently at with a story map. So it provides an understanding of how we're moving through this. But I think the important piece here is about how others can use it, or how we can all use it, either from an insurance perspective and the development of different insurance products, not just parametric, but also indemnity product as well, allowing us to more accurately price that risk. But I think also, if we're looking at governments and investors too, that they can utilize this information as well. And so they're able to understand where those ecosystems provide those benefits. They can map their exposures, of course. And then I think that, as I said right at the beginning, what's quite important is about how we manage it. And obviously valuing these ecosystems, we're able to manage them and protect them more effectively. I think the last piece of the puzzle, which I couldn't fit on here, is around investors and how they can use, and the fact that they need to be using models that focus in 20, 30, 40, 50 years time, where infrastructure is sort of invested in over that period, and how they can see the implications of degradation of those ecosystems on those investments in the longer term. So that's that in 3.5, 4 minutes or so. I'm very happy to answer any questions, but back to you, Swenja.
Yeah, thank you, Chip, for your input. That was really useful, and I think you developed an art of putting really a lot of really informative stuff on one slide. So well done on that. Yeah, let's now move to a sort of different perspective. I mean, this was kind of the insurer's perspective, and now let's move to Bikram Rana, who works on the Zurich Resilience Alliance as part of a team Practical Action. And I think here's the community perspective, or the NGO perspective, who's actually implementing projects, but who then also says, well, we see where the benefits are, but quantification is another matter. So over to you, Bikram, and really happy that you could join us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Swenja. So I'll try to show the work of Practical Action and Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance on nature-based solutions for flood resilience in the Lower Karnali. That's the project area where we are working. And then I'll try to show how we are supporting communities to be more prepared and more resilient by applying nature-based solution options, so that it protects them from flood, and it also helps them to restore degraded land, and also to support diversification of livelihood and affordability for the risk transfer mechanisms, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits as well. So that will be my highlights. So next slide, please. Yeah. So if you look into these pictures, the first two pictures are of a biodike. So biodike in the riverbanks reduce flood risk and protect the priority managed units, the farmland. So biodikes use local materials available in the community like soil, sand, bamboo, rattan, and vegetation is the major component of biodike, which revives degraded land sections. And it also does not require too much engineering knowledge, and it's cheaper than the Gavin walls and the concrete dams. So unlike Gavin walls, in these biodikes, instead of using the wire Gavin, we use these bamboo and rattan So in the wattle fence, and the spurs. So this also creates a space when you fill it with the soil, and then it creates a space for more vegetation. So the vegetation preferred in stabilizing the river bank slope is also bamboo. And then some of the species like the grass, it's a local name, and the bamboos and some of other species, so that they prevent the entry of the floods into the community and also protect the agricultural lands, so and also control the soil erosion. So these are also being co-funded by the local government. So I'll try to highlight why quantification is needed, but then why also definitions and the benefits are also needed. So I'll, in the final round, I'll also put my views on that as well. So we are also working with the community forest user groups and cooperatives to protect forest and create forest buffer alongside of river floodplain to maintain a natural barrier against flood. So some of the NVS options taken forward by the community forest users groups and cooperatives are the plantations along the river floodplain. So this action reduces settlement encroachment and increases the floodplain area. So when you have this increment of floodplain area, so it creates room for water to retain. It also deaccelerates the speed, infiltrates, so that means there is recharge, retention, and floodwater storage also increases the habitat and biodiversity in the area. And also it has a kind of increase in recreational value. And the protection of community forest and plantation of bamboo, rattan and cask grass is also, these species control soil erosion and retain degraded and land and habitat for the flora and fauna. But then you can also support to diversify the agricultural dependent livelihoods by bringing in the different species in the plantation. So that also becomes an income source for the community and the forest users group. I have an example. So there are many community forest users groups and the cooperatives. So forest users group have planted hectares of land. So for example, I'll just give an example from a Sati Karnali community forest user group. They have planted 170 hectares forest land with rattan and then with the bamboos, and they earn around 2.2 million rupees per year from these harvests. So that's another aspect where the communities can take up the species and then can support the nature-based solutions. So it also helps to strengthen the ability to contain losses and recover in a timely manner from the floods. So we have been looking for innovative ideas of investment and risk transfer mechanism. So now we have introduced index-based flood insurance, and it's under pilot, and it's co-funded by InsuResilience Solution Fund and the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. So there we always have a issue, frequently asked questions: how will the last mile poor be able to afford for the premiums of these insurances? So now we are connecting these nature-based solutions so that the forest user groups, they can identify the last mile poor, and the cooperatives can train them so that they can produce baskets and others. So they have a diversified livelihood and can pay for the insurance premiums. So that's how we are bringing in the practical aspects. So coming to the quantification on the NVS benefits, I do feel that it is important to quantify nature-based solution benefits. So this allows evaluation, and it also helps to understand the potential return on investment for nature-based solution, which helps decision-making, opting nature-based solutions, meaning nature-based solution evaluation can attract investment in nature-based solutions. But then I also feel that strong narratives to identify co-benefits like social, economic, and environment and ecology is also important for community. So once the community realize the direct benefits, then they also opt for the nature-based solutions. So it's not only the quantification of the nature-based solutions they opt, but then if they see the direct benefit, they also opt for the nature-based solutions. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bikram. And I think a really important point about the co-benefits and, this question of how we bring those in and also the narratives there. And yeah, I'm very pleased to be working with practical action in that context. Okay, third brief input before we put you all into the in breakout groups comes from MCII. A group very close to my heart because I'm the chair of MCII. So I'm very pleased that Ike and Maxime are here to share some of the project work that MCII is involved in. And yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Swenja, for the introduction. MCII is a think tank on climate change and insurance, and we are hosted at the United Nations University in Bonn, and we focus mainly on developing solutions for risks posed by climate change for the poorest and most vulnerable population in developing countries. My name is Maxime, and my colleague Eike. We will present you very shortly, I promise. We've got only 4 slides. What we are doing using the platform, the framework economics of climate adaptation. On the next slide, I think I show you an overview a bit of what the economics of climate adaptation is. But I think before I do that, I think there is, I'd like to reflect on what some other presenters, for instance, Christian Wertley from Swiss Re said, that there is actually already a case for nature-based solutions. We know there are benefits. The question now is, how do we actually transform these benefits into action? How do we actually fund these nature-based solutions? How do we make them actually work? How do we make the decision to use them against maybe others adaptation measures or together with other adaptation measures? And I think one point was made is it's very important not just to know the benefit, but then to have a stakeholder engagement approach as well, to have all stakeholders, universities, academia, governments, the private sector, insurance, NGOs, etc., and the communities. This is what the economics of climate adaptation is trying to do. It has been developed 10 years ago by Swiss Re and ETH University. And since then, it has been further developed, for instance, together with MCII and United Nations universities. We are trying to take this to the next level. The framework, together with an open source code, Climada, you can download that on GitHub. We give you the links later on. Answers mainly 3 questions that are asked by decision makers and stakeholders in many countries that want to adapt to increase their resilience. The first question is, well, what is our exposure? What is the risk we have now, today, but also in the future, coming from climate change? What is our exposure? Population, also assets. Once you answer this first question, the second one, which is the logical one, is, well, what can we do about that? What kind of measures, what kind of adaptation measures, nature-based solutions, but also infrastructure, also insurance, what can we do in order to minimize our exposure? And then very soon, the third question comes in. Well, now we have all these measures, all these options, but what do we do actually? Which one can we choose? Which one can we finance? So basically, you have to look into what is the benefit against the costs of certain measures. And then, spoiler alert, very often nature-based solutions have advantageous cost-benefit ratio against other type of measures. But then I won't talk too long about that. I just wanted to say basically in a nutshell that the benefits of nature-based solutions are to be considered against benefits of other measures, because this is always the way you are making decisions. And I think Eike will showcase very shortly in the next slide an example from Vietnam, 2 examples actually, very shortly.
Thank you, Maxime. I'm very conscious of time, and strictly speaking, speaking, you were only allowed to use one slide, so you're already on benefit time here, but go ahead. So just keep it short and give us maybe one example of how the quantification actually worked. That would be brilliant.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Maxime. Thank you, Swenja. Yes, our two case studies, just want to mention that we had also, especially in Canton, a very complex context with multiple hazards, compound flood risk, different flood regimes, and heat waves. And especially these contexts are very important in showcasing also the performance of NBS. And one key takeaway message was that we should not only compare NBS and gray engineered solutions, but also look onto the complementarity of measures. Now, how can we efficiently bundle and also sequence NBS solutions? And what we also found out was that the spatial and temporal context of NBS is quite challenging for decision makers, especially the temporal context is a very important factor always in prioritizing measures and also perceptions of stakeholders, but also, as Maxine mentioned, especially for investors. So really quantification can really help here. As you can see on the next slide, let me guide you through some outputs we derived from the Climata tool Maxime just introduced. Where we all start at the very beginning. So once we've done a flood exposure analysis for selected assets, for example, critical infrastructure, housing, etc. We do that for assets, but also people. And then we derive these waterfall diagrams you can see on the left-hand side, showing the annual expected damages of all assets combined, or even people affected for the present, but also for the future here until 2050. And you can see that the damage increases due to economic growth and of course also climate change under specific scenarios. Once we have identified these expected damages for selected assets, we move then into identifying measures. And here also in our projects in Canton, we have identified a long list of measures, also NBS, including grass swales, green roofs, urban forestry, tree planting, afforestation. And basically how we quantified these measures for or inside the Climata tool. So those measures undergone two evaluations, you could say. First, a performance evaluation towards risk reduction potential, and then an economic evaluation. In Climata, the parameterization of risk reduction can be done either through modifying the damage functions of your specific assets, either through the impact of exposure of assets or people, or you could modify it through the impact on hazard intensity and frequency, or even a combination of any of them. So for each measure, we did analysis and we identified variables and applied them to parameterize a flood risk reduction. For example, how could the effect of green spaces or green roofs create changes in peak flows, storage volume, delayed flood peaks, etc. In terms of heat waves, we had input variables really looking on meteorological variables. For example, we were looking into air temperature, forest albedos, but also evaporative cooling characteristics of specific measures, or even shading characteristics, anything that could influence evaporative or character of the environment. For the economic valuation of the measures, we use typical life cycle costing, really using cost-benefit perspective, where we included cost of construction, operation, and maintenance over the whole term period of the project, mostly for 30 years, and along with a return on investment.
I need to stop you here. I know, and this is annoying because this is the really interesting part here. But we need to go into the breakout groups. I know that Maxime has also shared the links there. So if people want to follow up, the links are there. And you will be both in one of the breakout groups. So maybe you can keep on that discussion there. Sorry to cut you short, but we're really otherwise running out of time. So, I think, well, thanks for sharing the insights there. And I encourage everybody to kind of look look at those. Leah, do you quickly want to get us into the breakout groups?
Yes, absolutely. So I will launch them now. So